Hello, my name is Father Tighe, and this is our 40th segment of our journey of faith in the light of the cross. And in this segment, we continue our journey to the sad destruction of Jerusalem. In our previous segment, we went from 950, the death of Solomon, when the country split into two nations, Israel and Judah. We went down in our last segment to the destruction of Israel, the northern kingdom. In this segment, we continue our journey down to the destruction of 587 of Jerusalem. And this is essentially connected to the crucifixion and then the destruction of Jerusalem a second time in the year 70. So we're looking at all of this in the light of the cross. We're not reading it like scholars. We're doing it in the light of the cross. So now we continue our journey. Now we go to our theme, which is Porneia penetrates the temple and destroys Judah in 587 BC. Prophets and Deuteronomy warn Judah, but to no avail. Now we're doing this because in segments 37 and 38, Paul emphasized the word porneia in his letter to the Corinthians. Now we go to our next screen, and we see God gave Judah one last chance after Israel in 722. Assyrians surrounded Jerusalem in 701 and demanded its surrender. Hezekiah consulted Isaiah the prophet, and God miraculously intervened and saved Jerusalem and gave it another chance. So we see, thus says the Lord, do not be frightened by the king of Assyria. I will put my spirit in him, that when he hears a report, he will return to his own land. And now we go and see that night the miracle happened, and we see that night the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 Assyrian men. So Sennacherib broke camp and went home to Nineveh. So they have a second chance. Will they take advantage of it? No, they won't, but we'll go on. When Hezekiah died, 2 Kings 20, his son Manasseh succeeded him and ruled for 55 years, but he did evil in God's sight. His son, good King Josiah, succeeded him. So good King Josiah has the one reform that can save Jerusalem. We go to that reform right now and we see what it says. Josiah pleased the Lord while repairing the temple. He began by repairing it. The high priest, though, as they repaired it, said, I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord. This is very important because we have the book of Exodus with the 10 Commandments, but this is the same book, but this time it's a different edition, and it's re-edited in the light of what has happened historically, and this is called Deuteronomy, which means the second law. So we have the 10 Commandments in Exodus and in Deuteronomy, but we emphasize this because Deuteronomy is the book of Judaism, okay? When he heard the contents, he tore his garments and commanded the priests, consult the Lord for the people of Judah, for the Lord's anger is ablaze against us for disobeying him. So Josiah says, tell these people we have one last chance because God's wrath is on fire. We go to our next screen and we see the king with all the elders went up to the temple. He had the entire contents of the book read aloud. This is another addition, another approach to Moses' teaching. Then he removed and burned all the objects made for Baal and Asherah. Isn't this interesting? In the temple in Jerusalem, we have the pagan male god and female goddess Asherah right in the temple, and he has to tear it out. He removed and burned the sacred pole, more phallic symbols. He tore down the apartments of the pornos and the pornei. They emphasize in the footnotes of our book that the apartments were not just the fertility goddesses, the women, the prostitutes, but the men. The women asserted their right to have male prostitutes there, so the male and the females were going in. Well, he burned down their apartments, which were built right into the temple. In the temple where they wove Asherah's garments, they were sewing for poor the mother goddess. We go to our next screen. The king defiled Topheth. Josiah showed his contempt for the fertility cults by defiling everything that was sacred to them. What was sacred to them? He did that to stop the immolation of daughters and sons to Moloch. They were burning their children in the temple of Jerusalem. That's how awful had become. He defiled the high places King Solomon had built in honor of Astarte, the other name of Asherah. But notice, 300 years before Solomon started the problem, and the writer here wants you to know it, he built apartments for his pagan wives. He had 1,000 wives because he made treaties with the pagan kings, and he had to be nice to their daughters, and he'd set up their pagan religion. He broke the pillars and sacred poles and replaced them with human bones. So Josiah showed his contempt by making it a cemetery with dead human bones. He slaughtered the priests on the altars of the high places. On every hill they had these altars that were terrible places for these fertility cults. Now we go to our next screen. Josiah did away with the consultation of spirits and household gods, idols, and other horrors. Yet the Lord's burning anger did not relent. Now, we'll see later sometime that Jeremiah came in at this time and he said, you're all a bunch of frauds. You didn't do it from your heart. That sick fertility cult still has control over you. The Lord said, Judah I will also put out of my sight as Israel. I will reject Jerusalem and the temple in my name. Now, this shocked the people because they thought once God saved it, miraculously in the beginning of our segment here, that he would never allow Jerusalem, his holy city, to be destroyed. King Josiah foolishly went out and fought the Pharaoh Necho and died at Megiddo. And now I just emphasized that at this time the prophet Jeremiah, we have his book, reform is a fraud and has no heart. Now we go to our next screen. Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon laid siege to Jerusalem. King Jehoiachin surrendered with the royal family and all the chief families. Jehoiachin, which is Josiah's son, did the nice thing for the city. Instead of getting it destroyed, he surrendered himself, his family, all the chief families, all the skilled workers, and he said he took all the treasures of the temple, he deported the whole army and all the craftsmen and smiths, but it doesn't emphasize the musicians and the scribes in the temple, and this is very important. The first deportation went without the destruction of Jerusalem, and they were treated well by Nebuchadnezzar because they surrendered. And this was the talented tenth that really reformed Judaism, and this was the beginning of Judaism as we know it. Now, after they were taken away, Zedekiah was named king in 598 BC. That's when the first deportation took place. Ezekiel went with the first deportation. If you read Ezekiel, you don't understand it unless you know he's in Babylon, but Jerusalem hasn't been destroyed yet. Now we go to our next screen. In the 10th year of his rule, Zedekiah rebelled. He was so foolish. They lost their brains. Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem. In Zedekiah's 11th year, when famine gripped the city, the walls were breached. The sons of Zedekiah were slain before his eyes, then he was blinded. The temple and palace and all large buildings were destroyed by the fire in 587 BC. The captives marched naked and shaven to Babylon. Because they fought back, a third ran down to Egypt, a third died, and a third were captured, and they were stripped of their clothing, and they were shaved of the hair on their body in case they escaped. They would be brought back, and they were marched from Jerusalem all the way to modern Baghdad. Babylon is right near Baghdad. When they came into the city, Ezekiel tore into the first deportation. And he said, you people caused this. You should have prevented this, but you caused it. All right, now, we'll take this up in our next segment. We set the groundwork for it, and we think of Jerusalem being destroyed. We think of our people now in Babylon, and we think of that beautiful old hymn, The Holy City. I love that hymn. It was so beautiful because there's an essential connection between this destruction, the crucifixion, and the destruction of Jerusalem in 70. I hope you continue this journey with us in these 10-minute segments as we think of how Jerusalem was destroyed and how it transformed the Jewish people and made them the people we are today. Thank you so much for joining us in our 40th segment of our journey of faith in the light of the cross.
And ever as they sang.